Good evening. How's everybody?
Good evening. Good. What about yourself?
I'm excited to be here. This is the highlight of my week. How sad is my life that this is the highlight of my week? I'm telling you what, but I look forward to this. I look forward to this. It's not nothing like the school business. I know this is a busy time. How many of you still have students? I tell you what, it's rough in June when you still got kids because they don't act very good. I remember I had to go to Independence High School one of the early days in June one year. It's been a long time ago. It's one of the schools I supervised. And I got there and they still had the old open mall area. Olympic and Independence were built in '67. And they had that big open mall concept back then with the rooms around the outside. I got there was more out in the mall than there was in the room. It was the middle of class. And the principal wasn't there, and Sam was in charge, Sam Bass, and he was AP there. I said, Sam, what's going on? He said, well, it's the end of school. I said, one of the things that you're going to learn in this business, Sam, if you live long enough, and I hope you do, is that how you end one year is how you'll start the next year. You've established a new culture in your building here that it's okay not to go to the rooms. You can't let your standards slide at the end of the year because that's how you'll start the next year. And so, unfortunately, I was right. It didn't go well at the beginning of the next year, and we had to bring in some additional support. We had to make some personnel changes, but they let it get away at the end of the year, and they couldn't get it back. I've never seen anything like it. I'm telling you, there was more kids out of the rooms than in the rooms, and they were not behaving. They weren't being polite about it either. It was an absolute disaster. So it's tough this time of year, especially if you still got kids. I know it is. Well, I see it's 6 o'clock. It's time to get started. Let's see who the stars of the week are. Sean said you get what you inspect, not what you expect. There's a lot of truth in that. I liked Heather's discussion board too. Her OMA was excellent as well. Macy brought up, several of you have brought up allotment sheet. So our weekly was to do this. Let's look at that right quick on our weekly schedule. We were to look at the hiring, interview, administrating human resources practices in your district, how you get position openings, job announcements, attaining candidates, interviewing process, and hiring. Also look at compensation and benefits. Now, the first of those is openings. And so I'll stop my share again and we'll talk for a minute. Every spring, they send you an allotment sheet. Says how many, if you're in a high school, says how many CTE teachers you'll have, what they'll be, how many English teachers, how many math teachers, how many science. In elementary, they'll say you get this many kindergarten, this many first, this many second. Middle school, it'll be this many team members, this many math and science, this many language, arts, social studies. They'll send you an allotment sheet. It'll have your state positions allotment by, and it'll have your federal allotment, and it'll have any local positions that they're going to fund locally. There's not a lot of those anymore, but there are a few. Now, the problem with that is it's just a swag. If I was teaching, if you were in my doctoral class this weekend in research and statistics, in quantitative, when we talk about where do we come up with our hypothesis or where do we come up with our research questions for a dissertation, we talk about the SWAG method. What is the SWAG method? It's just a stupid wild ass guess. That's SWAG stands for. Understanding your allotment sheet is just a swag. It's what somebody in the central office, and you will never find out who it is because they don't want to be blamed when it doesn't work out. Somebody in the central office has predicted or guessed how many people are going to be in how many students are going to be in your school. And they've based your allotment off of that guess. Now, as I said, you are the person as the principal who is going to bear the brunt of that, because it's going to go bad from time to time. It's going to go real bad. And parents are going to want your head on a stick. Because what's going to happen is you hired 4 third-grade teachers, and then enrollment didn't show up, and you're going to have to collapse 4 into 3, and instead of having 20 in the room, they're going to have 30 in the room, and parents are going to be madder than damn it. And you'll say, but I'm not the one that did the allotment. They don't care, because there's nobody from the central office that's going to come out there and deal with irate parents and say, we made a bad guess. Nobody's going to do that. It's going to be, it's going to be, we don't know where that came from. And so that's why, especially after COVID, you got to get out and find those kids. And where are they? Are they enrolled? At the 10-day mark, we do a soft count at the 10-day mark at the beginning of the year. And at 20 days, if you didn't make your enrollment totals, we start moving personnel. Sometimes you have to send them home. Sometimes you send them to where the kids are. But now, if they're being homeschooled or went to charter school or private school, you just have to send people home. You say, well, we got plenty of openings, but it may not be in the area that teacher's in. Say they're an elementary teacher and you didn't make it, but you say, well, I've got an opening over here at the high school. They're not certified to go over there. You just have to send them home. What does that do to the reputation of your district? People don't want to come and work for you if they know that it wasn't, that you can't fulfill the promise for them a job. They could have went somewhere else. That allotment deal is, boy, I'm telling you, it's just a car bomb waiting to go off every year. It's just a car bomb. Same thing happens with me. Determining I had to turn in the MSA schedule for the fall last fall. I had to try to guess how many students we were going to have in all the different classes last fall, a year in advance. I've done it a day or two. I'm decent at it, but sometimes it just goes wrong. Sometimes it just goes wrong. And then sometimes you get something like happened this spring where I got an email, from up the hill that said, we need to collapse some classes. They're all overloaded already. We don't care. We don't want to pay that salary. Well, I didn't want my hair to fall out. That's kind of beyond my control. The classes are all full. Yeah, but we still need a salary back. What are you going to do? You're going to start splitting up classes? You're going to start splitting up teams. You're going to start moving people around and reassigning all of your stipend report people, all your CC1s and CT2s and evaluators. You're going to start moving everybody around. You're going to start overloading classes on people who are just getting paid to teach a class. No. So what you do is you do what I do. Now, understand the point of the story is not that I'm a good person here. I'm far from it. So I just said, no problem. I'll teach Tuesday and Wednesday night just like I normally do. You can just pay me for 1 rather than 2. But we're not collapsing these classes. I'm not overloading adjunct professors who don't get paid anymore for you to double up their workload. We're not going to do that. I need for people to come back and work for me next semester. If I do that to them this semester, I won't have anybody next semester. I'm not about to do that. So I'll just take the hit and go on about my business. Sometimes that's what you have to do as principal. You have to take the hit and go on about your business. You have to give something else up. I'll do without an AP. I'll keep that teacher in that room. I'll do a trade, or we'll do without a teacher assistant over here. But you have to make those kind of decisions out of that allotment sheet. Again, that allotment sheet is just a guess, and most of the times it gets ugly. It gets real ugly. Parents have no patience when you tell them that you didn't make that decision. And so you got to get out and beat the bushes and find those students, because remember, the state only funds you the kids that show up, average daily attendance. They don't fund the ones on the roll. If they don't show up, they don't pay. And federal programs, the money follows the students. And if the students don't follow up, you don't get the federal money. It's just the way it works. So understanding your allotment, how you determine if you have openings, it goes back to your allotment sheet. Now, one of the things that I used to do when I was a junior high principal is I wouldn't hire that last person because I knew, but I was in a district where I could find people fairly quickly, and I had a long-term sub that I could stick in there till I could find somebody. But I'd a lot rather hire somebody late than hire somebody and then tell them you don't have a job. Because back in the day, junior high people could only work pretty much in junior high. They couldn't work in elementary. They couldn't work in high school. So you kind of got hosed on that deal. So if you hired one, that wasn't like they could go to the next school because there wasn't but 2 junior highs left in Charlotte at the time. Wasn't but 2 left, me and us and Ranson. The rest of them had already been converted to middle school, different, and they'd already done the licensure and worked on all that stuff. There wasn't but 2 of us left. You know, wasn't any place for those people to go. So I would give up something that I had, and then I would get something. If I made that position, then I could get whatever I gave up back. But that's all part of this as well. So you got to understand, to determine if you've got an opening or not, you've got to look at your allotment sheet. Now, some of that is you might have an opening late in the year, and you say, well, I've got an allotment for it this year, but I don't think I'll have an allotment next year. Would you hire something late in the year, or would you just try a long-term sub? That's one of those calls you got to make. Sometimes it's better off not, you're better not to, if you know you're going to lose that allotment, don't hire that person. Now, part and parcel to the allotment sheet is the intent sheet. Most districts every spring send out a notice to all the teachers, principals send them out, what your intent is for the next year. You understand that that's a waste of time. That's a sign of low IQ if you're sending that thing out. That means you're not very smart because it's not legally binding. It doesn't mean anything. If they get a better offer, they'll leave. If they don't, they'll stay. It has nothing to do with that piece of paper that they sent back to you. I don't know why we do foolish things like that, but we do. And that gives us a false sense of security. I'll give you an example that happened at Gardner-Webb recently. A young woman got pregnant. She was in her first year at Gardner-Webb, her first real adult job. And I said, we need to be making plans because I don't think she'll be back. What do you mean? You don't know her. She said she's got, I'm just doing probability here. What do you mean? I said, you understand that probability is the basis of all inferential statistics. That's my specific area of expertise, is inferential inside of quantitative. That means linear regressions, analysis of variance, algorithms, mostly linear regressions. So I do all the prop bets for the faculty at Gardner-Webb about, it's kind of like you see all these prop bets that people do. I'm the one that does all those, who will be the next person, this, that, or the other. And I just do probability. And so I said, if you read the national statistics, a woman having her first child before the age of 29, there's only a 30% probability that she'll return to work. I didn't make that up, and I'm not the one that decided that. Those people they're a neophyte, they're a beginner. They're not leaving anything. When they come back, they'll be at the same level. They can stay at home. It's not like they've made some status, have moved up the corporate ladder. They've not. They're at the beginning stages. They go home, they come back, they're still at the beginning stages. No harm, no foul. So only 30% probability that she'll come back. And I said, now the second indicator you need to pay attention to this is, when does she take her family leave? If she takes all of it before the baby is born, there's only a 5% probability that she'll come back. What is she going to do? Squat in the field, have the baby, and come back to work the next day? She has no days after she has the child. If she uses all of her days and she's less than 29 years of age, and this is her first child, there's only 5% chance she's coming back. You better be planning for that. It doesn't matter that she told you, I'll be right back, or she signed some sheet. Grow up, be an adult here. This is real world. You better have a plan B. And of course, when she didn't come back, they were mad at me for having pointed it out that she wasn't going to come back. It's not my child. I didn't birth her or the baby. I just told you what the probability was. Why are you angry at me? Well, because you told us and we didn't want to listen, and we thought we were smarter than you, and it turned out you were smarter than us. Now we're mad at you. Learn something. That's my advice to you. Learn something. But don't get caught flat-footed. And so I got an emergency call. Oh Lord, we've got all these student teachers we got to cover. I called them back in less than 5 minutes and said, done. I already had a plan in place. I'd already adjusted the MSA schedule so I could free some people up for student teacher supervision because I knew she wasn't coming back. I'd already told my folks. All I had to do is pick up the phone and say, we went to plan B on student teaching, and we covered 12 student teachers just like that. Because I had a plan. You say, well, Dale, wait a minute. You do doctoral and masters. What are you doing student teachers? Again, they're not smart enough to figure it out. So if you understand personnel, it always will fall to you. So it's a curse and a gift to understand personnel. But there's a rhythm to it that you have to learn. Otherwise, you're always going to have mad teachers or mad parents. Always. If you can't find the rhythm to personnel, to hiring, putting people in the right place, understanding your allotment sheet, understanding what to look for in employees. If you can't catch that rhythm, you take a whipping every day. You will take no whippings worse than personnel whippings. I'll just tell you that right now. Those are the worst ones you'll take. And it'll be every day and often during the day. You got to catch the rhythm of hiring, knowing what you're looking for, understanding your allotment sheet, paying attention to what's going on in your community. If you see something closing in your community and it's got jobs associated with it, that's first red flag. If you see people, if you see something open up in a neighboring community that pays a little bit better than what's paying in your community, you better be thinking about that. But all of those things, that allotment sheet, that, it's a guess. The intent sheet is of no value. It's not legally binding. And so you've got to understand that when you're looking, do I have an opening? What should I do? Leslie pointed out that one of the problems that we have with longevity, returning employees, is we've moved compensation and benefits to the beginning people of people's career. So it's made it easier, to give hiring bonuses and find people up front, but it's made it a lot harder to keep them on the back end. And that is absolutely true. You understand that in North Carolina, the teacher salary scale is frozen at 20 years. Basically, they're loaning you $5,000 a year for the first 20. When they gave you that $5,000 raise, it wasn't a raise, it was a loan. And they take it back by freezing your salary the last 10 years of your career. It's exactly what they do, which kills your retirement, by the way. They've also taken your insurance benefits away in retirement. And so that's made it harder to keep your older people. Well, what difference does that make? If you're in a border county, you got a whole nother to think about that intent, that returning. If you're in a border county from North Carolina, for South Carolina or Virginia, and about half the counties in the state border another state, as soon as people can get to retirement age, they will leave and go and double dip because of the way you did them on their retirement and the way you've done them on their salary. They've been held for the last 10 years from year 20 to year 30. And so they can cross the line and make $20,000 more in either South Carolina or Virginia because you didn't keep up that last 10 years in order to move money to the front and give signing bonuses and give more money to beginning teachers. So when you get people anywhere from 25 years plus, you better understand that any day that you walk in the building may be their last day. You got to understand that. How many people do I have that are in that retirement pocket where they could take early retirement at 25 years or, use sick leave or whatever. But anytime after 25, any day could be their last day. And if your faculty is heavily weighted to that age and you're in a border county, you better know that intent. South Carolina's being real aggressive. They don't care about certification in South Carolina. They pay you for your degrees. A fellow that I worked with at Gardner Webb, he left last summer. He left Gardner Webb. He just made full professor at Gardner Webb. He left Gardner Webb and went across the line. He'd already retired in North Carolina. Took early retirement, retired in North Carolina. Worked 10 years at Gardner Webb, got vested in the retirement system there, made 60 years of age, crossed the line into South Carolina. They gave him all these years in public school. They gave him all of his degrees. He crossed the line and got a $25,000 raise. Yeah. And especially teachers, when we don't pay for masters in North Carolina, they pay for masters and masters plus 30 in South Carolina. So if you're in a border county, you better understand that those people at 25 years or more, they're temps. As soon as they as soon as they can, they figure it out, they're gone. You got to be planning on that every year as well. So again, that intent sheet's not really worth a whole lot. Just going through, Olivia talked about access issues for their safety plan. I want to kind of go back over, catch back up on that. And one of the things she pointed out that's become kind of commonplace because that speaks to personnel that we're talking about now, human resources, because there's such a constant turnover, we're not updating our safety procedures and rosters. And Olivia pointed that out. That was a good catch, Olivia. But see, that's related to personnel. That's not really a safety plan issue. That's a personnel issue because personnel is churning and turning over so much, we can't keep up with all of our documentation behind the scenes. That makes our schools unsafe because we don't know, Miss So-and-so is supposed to do that. Miss So-and-so don't work here anymore. Again, these personnel issues have wide-ranging implications for everything that we do, especially our safety plans, our evacuation plans, our first responders, all of those. You got to update those things weekly. You're supposed to update the student rosters every Monday. But you need to make sure that every month or two, you look at all these plans and make sure, do I still have the right people that are doing this stuff? Or did they get reassigned? Did they move somewhere else? Did they leave me? Those things need to be living documents that you update on a regular basis. So that was a good catch, Olivia. Rebecca pointed out that the allotment sheet is just a projection. Talking about next week's task about IEP and intervention. Leslie said a lot of schools dropped the ball on the 90-day intervention, and Leslie's absolutely right on that because they don't understand. See, EC, you've got an EC person in the central office, that's your EC executive director or assistant superintendent. You've got a department chair, you've got compliance technicians. You have none of that for intervention. An intervention is a school-based committee, SBC. That means the principal is responsible for it. There is nobody to come behind you to make sure everything, you hit all your head counts, everybody's getting what they're supposed to be getting. There is nobody that does that. It's you. That would be you, Miss Perkins. That's an old gag from when I was an elementary principal. I was in my office one day. All of a sudden, the light started shaking and flickering, and I was like, Lord, have mercy. I was at the end of an old primary ring. I went running outside. We had a little small kindergarten playground right at the end of the building, and kindergartners were climbing up on the building using the power lines to climb up on the side of the building. And I had an old kindergarten teacher. She was, I can say old because I'm old now. She's probably wasn't as old as I am now, but she was old. Been teaching for 40 years. She was standing there and she said to me, this is her class, somebody ought to get control of these kids. And I said, that would be you, Miss Perkins. We paid you. to have control of these kids. And so, as you know, as I said then, and I'll say now, that would be you, principal. You are responsible for intervention. The EC people are just consultants. They are not in charge. They are not responsible. They come and sit in on the intervention just as a team member, but they have no responsibility to make sure that you're hitting all of your requirements. That would be you. Principals think, well, since it dovetails into EC, they'll just be responsible for that. No, they won't. And in the eyes of the law, the state has determined that MTSS teams, RTI teams, any intervention team by state designation and state governance is a school-based committee headed by the school principal, period. You better know that. You better make sure people are doing what they're supposed to be doing. All right. I've already talked about them, federal programs. Oh, Michelle, she's not in this group. I think she was in our group last night. She had an excellent title, Special Programs Federal Audit. So my question to you is why is it important, if you're a school principal or if you're doing your OMA task 1 in our class, why is it important to do an audit of your federal programs? That's EC 504, intervention, even though it's not federal, it dovetails in intervention, Title I, English as second language, CTE, and academically gifted. Why is it important? Now, when I say audit, what have you got and what are they supposed to provide to children? What are they supposed to get? It's important to do that audit because what programs do we schedule first in the master schedule? Our federal programs. If we don't know what we got and what they're supposed to get, more than likely we're going to be out of compliance with federal law when we schedule if we don't know what we got and what they're supposed to get. That's the whole notion of doing that special POPS audit in OMA Task 1, is to get you understanding that when you're building a master schedule, if you're scheduling your federal programs first, which that's what you're supposed to do, if you don't know what you've got or what they do, probably you're not going to get it right. And that's that. So Michelle did an excellent job on that, you know, as good as a principal would do to make sure that they did the right thing when they scheduled their school. Lillian talked about a weighted system for allotments. That's just specific to her district. We'll talk about that when we talk about our next case study. Nicole got to sit on a couple of interviews. And I want to talk about that because that's HR. And she said, you know, the person that went in kind of went off script and asked some, you know, did some follow-up questions. Do not do that. When you're a principal and you're in charge of hiring, it's a great idea to set up committees to interview the parents or teachers or whatever, but you need to hand them their questions. These are the ones that you will ask. We even do it at the college. I showed mine last night. I won't bother you tonight. We had our questions before we went in, and we had who was going to ask each question. Now, we had a person in one of the interviews that went off the script. And so we had a person that wrote them down and said, you know, did you hear anything else other than these? We'll have to ask our other candidates the same questions, or we have violated federal law. Now, the problem with going off the script is what about the person we'd interviewed the time before, earlier in the day? We didn't ask that person those questions. We get in trouble. We get in trouble. Everybody's got to be asked the same questions in the same order by the same people. You can't go off script. And you got to be very careful about the kinds of questions that you ask. So here is a primer for you. I put this in our shell. So let me share my screen. Here's some do's and don'ts. I put this under module 2 for HR. Legal and illegal interview questions. Marital status. The only thing that you can ask about that is if they have somebody related that works in your school or in the school district. You can't talk about residence, pregnancy, physical health, unless they have, unless their job says they have to lift 25 pounds. Family, name, photographs. You can't ask for pictures. You can't ask anything about their age, their education, their citizenship, national origin, ancestry, race or color, religion, other than you can ask if they can work on Saturday or Sunday if the job requires that. But you can't, can't be about religion. You can't ask about organizations they belong to, about their military service, their height or their weight, arrest or convictions. These are things you can't ask. Now you see it says you can ask some things and others, but the rule of thumb for me is to stay away from those areas. And make sure you vetted all your questions before you start, and everybody knows this is your question. Don't ask anything else other than your question, and be careful with follow-ups. Now, the caveat to that at Gardner Webb is we invite people in, they sit with the committee, they do the formal interview, and then they're required to do a 1 hour teaching. They have to teach a lesson for 1 hour. They have to do a class session. Now you can ask questions there, but not in a formal interview. So that way we can kind of get to see them answer questions. Now, I had a situation not long ago where a candidate came in for a job. I was on the committee, and she was answering the questions before we could even get them read out to her. Somebody had sent her a copy of the questions because they were her favorite. That was their favorite candidate. And so one of the people in there, it was pretty obvious to see, was angry and went off script and started asking questions that hadn't been on the list. And the person kind of looked over to the side to the person that I'm quite sure had sent them the list of questions. But I thought, that sounds like something I would do, but then I realized I'm smart enough not to ask questions that are not on the script either. But that was just kind of that was to try to say, hey, I know what you did, kind of thing. I'm smarter than you. Put your ego aside. Don't go off script on questions, even on something like that where you realize that somebody on the committee was trying to put their thumb on the scale. But two wrongs don't make a right, folks, is what I'm telling you. I've seen a lot of hinky stuff in employment hiring, but two wrongs nobody can give you permission to break the law. Two wrongs don't make a right, because they illegally sent her the copy of questions before she and prepped her for the interview. That's on them. If they get caught, then that's on them. But don't do what the other person did, went off script and started asking questions. She's looking around like, and then she was stumped. And I was like, well, we already knew that somebody had given her the questions. You didn't have to be, to do this, do something else illegal just to prove a point. And I've seen that happen before. Have your list of questions before you start. Everybody's already designated. It's got their name right there on it. This is the question you ask, and there's no follow-ups. You ask your question. And that's the risk you run with parents. Because a lot of times they'll just ask crazy things, stuff that they're not allowed to. So again, you've got to coach your interview team. Here's the script. Here's the questions. Don't go off the script. Don't be asking things. Don't ask follow-ups. Here's what you can ask. And of course, parents won't ever do that. So you're taking a big risk when you have parents on your interview team. Since they don't get a check, they think they can do whatever they want to. But you're responsible if they do something crazy. Like say, looks like you might be pregnant. Oh my Lord. Are you intended to work after you have that baby? Oh my Lord. I've had parents do that. So, you're responsible for this to happen. So that's one of those things you need to try to avoid if you can. Okay. Robin has completed. We got several people, including Robin, who've gone on to task 4. Kristen talked about Kristen Green, is she with us now? I think she was in last night's group. She's already finished all 6 of her discussion boards. But one of the things she talked about is, on a sexual harassment and cyberbullying, start with law enforcement. That's exactly right. You have to start with law enforcement. And let me show you this. And then I'm going to get in a rant about that one. So let me show you the law first. All right. Remembering your case study for this week, and we'll go over it in a minute, and I'll go over the directions again. Back to law, the role of the principal. This is 115C288. To make accurate reports to the superintendent. All right. Now, in your case study coming up next week, that's what the principal of the school did. He called the superintendent. So he wasn't in the wrong. He did exactly what he was supposed to. He reported that what had happened because it wasn't criminal. Although it was a violation of the law, it wasn't criminal law. The teacher had violated federal, had zero tolerance, and had violated state law on grading and local board policy, but it wasn't criminal. So you call the superintendent. The superintendent told him just to be careful. That's all the superintendent can say, because who grades and classifies pupils? Not the superintendent, the principal. So both of them are in the clear. But now you say, but wait a minute, Dale, down here it says to report certain acts to law enforcement and then the superintendent. If it's a criminal act, it goes to law enforcement first and then to the superintendent. That's very important. That's exactly what the law says. So when you get a report of cyberbullying, bullying, sexual harassment, sexual assault, sexual offense, indecent liberties, rape, you get any of those sexual things, any of them, they're all criminal. So who's the first person you call? Law enforcement. It says so right there. You can't miss it. And then you call the superintendent's office. But law enforcement, there's a reason why it says law enforcement first. That's your first call. I've told you, I used to be that person. Principals would call me. Did you call the law yet? No. Well, hang up. Don't call me. Hang up and call the law. I'm not going to be seen as a part of a conspiracy to cover this thing up. That's how cover-ups start. Oh, we're going to handle this one in-house. No, we're not going to handle it in-house. We're going to call the law. I told you, there's a case right now in Bellingham, Washington. 3 assistant principals have been charged criminally for not reporting to law enforcement. Criminally. They may go to jail. They've got civil lawsuits against them already, but they've been charged criminally. If they lose that, that's going to be a game changer, folks. When you get a report of a violation, a criminal violation of the law, you have to call the police first. Now, that portends that you have a working relationship with your school resource officer. I had 2 that were great friends of mine. I understand, but I didn't make them do my job. I understood they weren't there to do discipline for the kids. That was not their role. And if you don't have a resource officer, there's one that's assigned to your school that's nearby. But don't initiate investigations of a sexual nature. That's a crime. So understanding that. So the North Meck example, mother came in with a 16-year-old daughter and said she's been raped. School didn't tell the resource officer from Huntersville PD and did an investigation, came back and told the mother, no, it was consensual, wasn't rape. Of course, the mother then went to the news media and to the police. The police came on through the school under the bus and said, we're quite sure a crime was committed, but they have ruined the evidence by conducting their own investigation. We're sorry, but we can't help this family. I had to let the whole administrative team go, by the way. So, but she was 16 years old, Dale. According to that handy dandy manual, you told us it was our Bible. It says in the back, age of consent is 16. But there are conditions on that 16. She was self-contained EC. If they're self-contained EC, do they have the mental capacity to consent at any age? That would be no. That was a rape. Doesn't matter that she was a willing participant. She did not have the mental acuity to consent. School was like, oh, we forgot that part. Mm-hmm. Yep. That's a hot topic of debate over an unemployment line. That's what happens to you. So you got to make sure that you interpret, the law correctly. If it says to the superintendent first, that means that while it might be a violation of the law, it's not a violation of the criminal code that's in that handbook that defines your acts of crime and violence, the criminal code for you. There's 16 of them. They're in the back of your manual. If it's a violation of the criminal code, and cyberbullying, it, by the way, is a criminal act, then you have to call law enforcement first. Now, there's this, I've heard 2 or 3 things out there. I get feedback from students, and I'm in schools every week or two. Oh, that cyberbullying law was repealed. No, it wasn't. One subsection of the cyberbullying law, the Twitter battle law section, was repealed. And that was very simply, me and Olivia are in a Twitter battle. We're slamming one another back and forth, or we're in a TikTok war. And she starts, obviously she's a lot younger and smarter and brighter than me and a lot more with it. So I start losing. And so I can't now claim that I am being cyberbullied because I'm losing to Olivia. She's wearing me out because I was a willing participant in this. That's the only part that got repealed. Everything else is still there. And so I had a response already this year that said, well, they talked to their principal and they said, well, if it was under their jurisdiction, they'd wait a minute. What do you mean? If a parent came in and reported cyberbullying, well, if it's under our jurisdiction, if a parent came in and reported it, it's under your jurisdiction. That's the litmus test. If you became aware of it, you have to deal with it. Wait a minute. What do you mean? The machine, the device that they used is immaterial. Where they were when they did it is immaterial. The law says if it disrupts the educational environment, that means if a parent comes in and complains, you have to deal with it. What's your first move? You get law enforcement involved. That's your first move. They have warrant powers. You don't. And most of this stuff's going to be on cell phones, and you can confiscate them, but you can't open them. You can't get a warrant and open them up and see what's on it. I had an AP that I trained at Hove High School. He was smart enough to actually was awake when I trained him. He saw a bunch of boys around the phone in the cafeteria. He grabbed the phone, went to the resource officer. They got a warrant, opened it up, and he was convincing these middle school girls next door at Bailey to send him naked photos. And then he was blackmailing these underage 12, 13, 14-year-old girls to have sex with him, and he was 18. He's about 10 years into a 20-year sentence in federal pen right now. That's what we're talking about. You need to get law enforcement involved to see what's going on. But if a parent brings it to you, if a kid brings it to you, if it hits social media, you have a legal obligation to deal with it. Don't claim, well, they didn't do it at school or that happened in the neighborhood. No, that it's going to come to school. You have to deal with it. Well, they weren't using the school computer. How dumb are you? Doesn't matter what device they were using. But, that was repealed. Cyberbullying was not repealed. Only the Twitter war part of it was repealed. That was it. All the rest of it's still right there in place. But I can't tell you, I get more excuses on why folks don't deal with cyberbullying's number one now. That's the number one thing you've got to deal with in terms of those kinds of behaviors. There's a lot more cyberbullying than face-to-face bullying now. A lot more, probably 10 to 1. Now, anybody know what prescient means? That means you can kind of see the future. I told you, I do probability. I do all the prop bets. So, 13 years ago, I did a presentation for NCDPI. I was retiring, Charlotte Meg. I did a presentation. I predicted what the future was going to be in terms of these kinds of things. My number one was cyberbullying. How did I know that 13 years ago? Because I was collecting data. I hired a criminologist in the largest district in the state, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to get some of these persistently dangerous incidents that were occurring down. We got onto the notion of antecedent behaviors. The little things become the big things. If you let the little things go, and we'll talk about this in discipline, they'll become the big things. All this cyberbullying, guess where it leads to? Sexting, texting, all that. It leads to sexual assault, rape, sexual offense. It also leads to violent acts where a kid comes in and shoots another. It also leads to a lot of suicides as well, unfortunately. If you want to curb the big stuff, you know, the big 9, there's 16 acts of crime and violence. 9 of them are acts of violence that count against your persistently dangerous total. That means if you exceed that 2 years in a row, you're out of a job as a principal, you lose your house. If you want to stop the big ones, you got to stop the little ones. They start with those phones, sexting, texting, cyberbullying, social media. That's where it starts. Even I'm smart enough to have known that 13 years ago. I wasn't clairvoyant. I just was running the numbers. I was just doing the probability. And I'll show you that exact presentation that I did at the Four Seasons at the big yearly conference that NCDPI puts on. I was the keynote there that year. I will show you that presentation, and you'll see. Well, you know, you'd think, well, this looks normal to us, but I did this 13 years ago. Again, the data tells you these things. I'm not that smart. Y'all have already figured that out. But if you're tracking your data, if you're following, if you're paying attention, if you're handling your business, if you're doing the little things, the big things will take care of themselves. But we find every excuse not to deal with the little things. Oh, that didn't happen at school, or we don't know anything, or no. Handle your business. You know, get to law enforcement, get it dealt with. Oh, it's going to be bad PR for our school. It's going to be even worse if you have something a lot worse than a little sexting or texting going on. It's going to be a whole lot worse. Take your lumps now while it's still manageable. Get in front of it. That's the whole thing about cyberbullying. David, I said I would prompt you on this when I'm ready for you now. I think I gave you a heads up. Tell us about provisional hiring. We're back to HR now. I'm off my cyberbullying rant.
Well, what the principal said in my interview was that since COVID, a lot more people are coming in from the workforce, or they're getting more candidates that don't have licensure or in the process of getting licensure.
What we used to call lateral entry, I think we now call them residency.
Mm-hmm.
Same thing.
For example, me right now in my position, I'm able to apply for assistant principal jobs, and I have under a provisional license. So
right.
Principals have seen more of that since COVID.
Absolutely. And I wanted to highlight that because what I'm worried about, not with administrators, what I'm worried about with teachers, I've still, you definitely don't want me to take my shirt off, but if I took my shirt off, you'd see the scars on me from lateral entry back in the day, back in the 90s in Charlotte. We got on this kick back in the 90s in Charlotte of hiring lateral entry people. The troops to teachers people, the Teach for America people, and the reason why was because they were cheap. We got on that kick of bringing in just regular lateral entries, people who had been in the business world, had worked for the banks. The banks back in those days would hire 5,000 kids out of college, and they'd weed through them, and they'd only keep like 500 of them after 2 years. And they would send them to banking school. But that first 2 years was kind of like a probationary period. So you'd have about 4,500 of those young people, that didn't make it or didn't like banking, and you'd get a lot of them, and it was cheap. And we got into that. But I'm going to tell you right now, it puts a lot of work on principals because they act like you're the one that has to follow up to make sure they're taking their courses and doing. That's what I'm talking about. This is not like David. He's in a program. His program's already laid out for him. The problem with lateral entry or residency people is they get to pick and choose when they go and take courses. They just have to take so many per year, and they're not in a program. oh my Lord. And you may lose them at any time. All of a sudden they decide they don't want to take classes or didn't go or didn't, at the end of every year, they got 3 years and they didn't take the right number of hours and you got to lay them off. Oh my Lord. That's a whole nother level of HR to deal with if you're doing residency, provisional hires. Lakeitha, go ahead. We still can't hear you. You're unmuted, but we can't hear you. No, your red lights come up. Try it now. No. She doesn't have any sound tonight. Whitney?
Along those same lines, for a while, the district I'm in was hiring teachers who were only birth through kindergarten certified and they could only teach kindergarten. And finally, they put a stop to that and said no more, because then what are you going to do with them if you don't have any kindergarten jobs?
Exactly. That's why we phased out our BK program at Gardner Webb. You're exactly right, Whitney. We got on that kick for a while. That BK kick, and we opened up a BK program at Gardner Webb. But then the schools figured out we can't do anything with these people. If they can't teach kindergarten, then we can't. So they started hiring people that they could move around to give them more flexibility. Maybe do a combo or do a blended or any of that. It really limited their flexibility, and so they stopped hiring those people. And so our program we still got it in name, but we shut it. We're sunsetting that program now because we can't. There's no market for those people. South Carolina, as Mary said, that joined 25% of the teaching population can now be uncertified. There's two different issues here, and Mary brings up a good point. There's two different issues here. One is uncertified people that just going to be uncertified. And then the residency people that you're trying to get certified, but they got to get their hours. As crazy as it sounds, I'd rather have the non-certified people because I don't have to worry about are they getting their hours or not, unless they've got some kind of contractual agreement with the local that says that they got to get certified in a certain period of time. And then you're back in that same residency lateral entry hell that I've still got scars from back in the day. When I went to the high school in Charlotte, when I left the junior high and became senior high principal, I inherited 40 lateral entries in the high school, 40. Keeping up with them was a full-time job. Are you getting your hours? Have you gone to school? Where are you? I can't tell you, I didn't take but one course this year. I need to get 2 this summer. Well, you do understand that the college schedule and the high school schedule don't mesh. You can't leave the last month of school at 9 o'clock in the morning to go to your class out at UNC Charlotte. I can't let you do that. Well, I need to take these classes in summer school or I'm going to be out. But you could have taken 2 in the fall and 1 in the spring or vice versa. Well, I didn't want to take any this spring. I didn't want my hair to fall out. You got to be grown people here. Expecting me, well, I can come in and do first period. We were early start high school. I can come in and do first period, but I got to leave after first period's over. First period went from 7 to 9:30. To 8:30. I got to leave at 8:30 and be out of class at 9 o'clock. I'll be back later in the day. I'm not allowed to do that. Well, summer school's already started. As you know, just like with y'all, summer school starts in the middle of May. We weren't out till the middle of June. I can't let you go every day for a month and not be here at school working. And you can't get out there and get back. You're going to miss 2 periods in a 4-period day. I can't do that. It was a complete nightmare. I understand we're having to do what we're having to do, but I'm telling you, you're taking on a whole nother level of pain, torture, supervision to take on residency, provisional, lateral entry, whatever your district calls them. You're taking on a whole nother level of pain. Dale's advice, avoid them like the plague. It rarely works out for you. Sean?
I won't take a counterpoint to that one, if you may, if you
Okay.
mind, sir. I think it's germane to the comments you made earlier. If you get in a good rhythm of what to ask and become a decent judge of character, then you have a pool of candidates you can pull from.
Yeah.
Because it's, I mean, just like that first year teacher you get out of school and they experience a classroom for the first time and go, I did not sign up for this abuse.
Exactly.
And
You're
they're
just hoping
gone.
they show up sober and clean clothes every day.
Exactly. So when you're looking at your alternative certification folks, you got to give yourself does this person seem like a responsible individual who can plan their way out of a paper sack?
Well, the issue is you can hire grown people to do that, but I'm talking about these 1 and 2 year kids out of business school that didn't make it banking because they probably were out all night at the bars, keeping college going, keeping the party going. Show up the same clothes they had on the day before with 5 or 6 bar stamps on their hand because all their friends are servers and waiters, and they go to the after party that starts at 2 when all the bars close. They go to the other places till 4, and their friends don't have to get up, so why should they? All these B school kids, business school kids, would descend on Charlotte every spring. They'd hire 5,000 of them in the banks. Only about 500 of them would cut it, and that would put 4,500 23-year-olds on the street. And they all thought, well, I'll just go over and teach school, lateral entry. To Sean's point, they were not responsible adult people. That's why they didn't make it in banking. Now, if you can find somebody that's 35 years old, that's had a career in something else, 40 years old, you want them, they'll get it done. But except for every one of them, there's 100 of those 23-year-old kids that didn't make it in banking is the problem. It's a numbers game.
In North Carolina, another quick question for you, sir. In North Carolina, for those provisional folks, in South Carolina, provisional folks are on an annual contract. So at the end of the contract, if it don't work out,
they're all on the end of year.
Okay. You decide, thanks, but no thanks, you're not coming back.
Exactly. They're end of year. They've got no expectation of continuing employment. In North Carolina, if you're hired past the 10th day of school, you're on the end of year as well. That gives us a little more leeway with them. Let me say that again. If you're hired past the 10th day of school, you're automatically on the end of year. If you are lateral entry, residency, provisional, you're automatically on the end of year. Is the way that works. But there are some good people out there, grown people that have done something else that you would love to have. Now, I love the troops to teachers. The peace dividend, the wall falling helped me in one way and hurt me in another way. So in 1989, we forget the Berlin Wall fell in 1989. What's that got to do with school business, Dale? Well, it had a big impact on us in Charlotte. I can tell you right now. All of a sudden, with the wall down, we started getting all these Eastern European refugees, and our ESL was set up for the Vietnam War refugees that spoke Hmong and Vietnamese and Spanish, which, in Charlotte. All of a sudden, we got all these people from all the Russian former satellite countries that spoke Moldovan and Russian and Ukrainian. And that was really hard. Now, that was really tough for us. I mean, all my people either spoke Spanish. I had 2 or 3 that spoke Spanish, and I had 6 that spoke Vietnamese Hmong, because we had a large refugee population from the Vietnam War. And it was really hard in the first 2 or 3 years to deal with that. But the benefit of the peace benefit, the Cold War being over and the wall falling, and the peace dividend was there were a lot of officers from the rank of captain down up to major that had anywhere from 10 to 20 years of service that the drawdown in forces, as Sean pointed out, that got rifted out. Not because they were bad, just didn't need near as many people. And so anywhere from 10, 11 years to 20 years. And I got some great people from the military, some great people. Couldn't have been more responsible, couldn't have been better. Captain Brown, you know, Charles, who was like, you know, became one of my best friends ever. You know, I hired him, made him an assistant to the principal, which would be a dean in Charlotte now. Got some really good people from troops to teachers. But they were grown, responsible adult people who had discipline, who showed up to work every day on time, you know, didn't have to go and, you know, help them find their room. But if you can get some of those, but see, you don't get those anymore. You don't get the troops to teachers people anymore. You get some retirees who will come and do ROTC at the end, but you don't get the troops to teachers like we got with the peace dividend of the early 90s. You don't get those anymore. You don't, again, mostly what you get now is the kids, the B school graduates that couldn't cut it in banking or didn't have the discipline to work in the corporate world. You get them, and they're a nightmare. They are absolutely a nightmare. Trying to keep up with them, trying to make sure they get their classes. They're not responsible. Well, I couldn't afford tuition this spring. You knew you were going to have to pay it. Well, I didn't have it. You know, we gave you a supplement and we advanced it to you so that you'd be able to pay that. Instead of having to work the whole year to get your month and a half supplements check, we gave it to you at Christmas so you could pay for your classes in the spring. Yeah, but I had a lot of bills to pay. If I had a nickel for every one of them that I had to deal with, oh my Lord. So while I'm old, because of specifically where I worked, the last 17 years of my career, in the largest district, I experienced back then a lot of what people are experiencing now for the first time. We had this back in the 90s in Charlotte, is what I'm telling you. 30 years ago, we were dealing with this crap. It's not easy. Now everybody's getting to share the pain that we felt back then. And so you learn some stuff. You learn that allotment sheets of guess. You learn that, these kids that didn't make it in banking, nobody's better than them, really. If you're taking residency or lateral entry, you've got to adjudicate, like Sean said, you've got to have that notion is these people will fall through and get it or they won't. It's kind of hard. All right. Terrence was in last night's group. Brenda said she worked the job fairs. Brenda was not. No, that's good. That's good experience. Olivia pointed out the caution on residency teachers again. Good catch. You just heard my rant on that, Olivia, but she's right. I'm glad that Whitney is head of the MTSS committee at her school. I picked that up. I told you I read this stuff. Tell us about that.
It has been chaos being a first grade teacher and doing that. This year we had an interim superintendent and he decided to cut our curriculum coach jobs to fill vacancies, which didn't work because two of the four of them left.
They'll just go somewhere else.
That's what they did.
And then you don't have teachers or curriculum coaches.
No, and we don't have an assistant principal. We have the self-contained classes for the whole district, so our principal is always in an IEP meeting.
Oh yeah.
And because I had been on the MTSS committee the longest, I got voluntold.
And again, the EC people are just there to laugh at you, basically, and say, welcome to our world. They are not responsible. It has to be school people, regular school people in charge of MTSS. I don't know why when we made this shift, people thought there would be somebody else that would do this for us. No. I can tell you right now, I hate to say it, but if I'd have been a principal, I'd have showed out. I'd have been so mad when you said, we're going to put this on you to have to do, without any staff to do it. Are you kidding me? I mean, look at all the people we got in EC for the paperwork, and they don't have near as many kids as MTSS, and the paperwork's just as bad. Let me say that again. MTSS is every kid in your building, and then the ones that are identified a whole lot more in EC. And think of all the people that they've got on staff to try to deal with it, and you've got no additional staff to deal with it. Ouch. Here's an idea. We need to work on instruction so we don't have so many in remediation. And you say, well, what are you talking about? Intervention we don't want to say the R word anymore, which is remediation. It's a dirty word now, but that's all intervention is, folks. It's remediation. If kids get it the first time, you don't have to remediate them. Here's an idea. Better instruction on the front end. See, teachers now are just licking the promise on the front end. I will just get you on intervention on the back end. I'm going to keep up with my pacing guide. If they're not, if you're pitching and they're not catching, you got to stop. I don't care what your 6-week lesson plan says. You got to stop and try to help them get it. But we're not stopping now. We are not stopping. We're just, we'll catch it on the intervention.
Well, that's the problem I'm seeing with the implication of the MTSS process is, hey, we're all going to this common formative assessment. So now from a district standpoint, you all have to be on the same lesson on the exact same day. Well, that dog don't hunt.
No. That means you're pitching whether they're catching or not. That's not the way that's not how we do school. Assessment drives instruction. You're supposed to read what your students did that week. And you're supposed to pick up and fill in any gaps to start with, or point out the things that you want to see. And if you miss something, you need to make sure that you go over that part. That's how assessment drives instruction, not some 6-week lesson plan that says we're all on this page on this day. That's our problem right there. And then we're saying, we'll just catch it on the backside on the intervention. No, we won't.
A big part of our problem too was I didn't have time to go meet with the teachers to make sure they were doing the interventions.
Right. And
Because
if you
I was
don't
in my
go meet
own
with them,
room.
they won't do it.
Right. I was in my own room doing my interventions.
So,
right, which is when you plan into your schedule. When do you plan time into your daily schedule? Since we're getting to that whole OMA deal, for teachers to meet, to have the discussion, to go through and develop what are we going to ask, when are we going to ask it, and how are we going to pick up the pieces in a cumulative course. And you can do it, but you got to give people time to execute it, to your point, Whitney.
It felt like I was spinning all year long.
Yeah, and it portends that your PLCs have to actually be working, and that you have to have time, and you're not covering classes because you didn't hire substitutes. Yeah, I mean, all this stuff is linked together, folks.
And with no curriculum coach and only one administrator, a lot of our PLCs weren't even happening because nobody was making sure they happened.
Not good.
Because if it ain't important to the boss, because the boss can't show it's important by showing presence, it ain't important to anybody else.
That's exactly right. So Whitney has set up my next story. So when I was principal at Eastway, I hired a young man. His name's Ray Giovanelli. You know Ray G? So Ray eventually opened up, his goal, his dream was to be an elementary principal. He opened up Washington Potts Elementary in Cornelius, and he opened up Grand Oaks in Huntersville. He lives in Vermilion, on the backside of Huntersville, Old Town Huntersville. He lives over in Vermilion. I saw Ray recently. Every time I see him, like, God, how old am I? Because I still remember him as a beginning teacher. And he's retirement age now. And so Ray was principal at Washington Potts in Cornelius, and he said, Doc, can you come by? I said, I've got a problem. I think, I was already at Gardner Webb then, but stay in touch with Ray. I said, I'd love to. I'm honored that you'd have asked me to come out. So I went out and he said, we've been, Keith has been there 5 years. Good for you. So I went to washing pots and he said, here's my problem. He said, we were one of the first in the district to implement RTI, which now has become MTSS, response to intervention. He said, here's my problem. We've had it fully implemented for 3 years. And my reading scores have been 80, 80, 80, all 3 years. Well, I said, well, as a quantitative researcher, I can tell you that means there's been no treatment. He said, no, we've had, if we did a simple t-test, that would tell us that you might have said you had a treatment, but because it wasn't effective in research, we'd say they've had no treatment. And I said, well, give me a few minutes and I'll come back and see you about lunchtime. He said, let me go walk around, see what I can see, talk to some people. So I went down to the MTSS lady, Whitney's counterpart, and I talked to her about, their system and all those things. And I said, do you go to the rooms to make sure that they're delivering those intervention lessons? No, I don't have time. I said, well, what do you do? She said, I just have them sign this sheet. Okay. So I walked back down to the office. I hadn't been gone about 10 minutes. And Ray said, you're already back? I said, yeah, I'm done. I said, teachers aren't teaching the intervention lessons because nobody's going to see about it. Lady said she's never been in the room and watched an intervention lesson. So what that means is they aren't teaching intervention lessons. They're grouping them up, and one teacher stays in grades papers while the others go out to their specials, PE or art or whatever. And because she had to stay back with this bunch, she's just probably sitting there grading papers, either that or doing the same lesson again, just talking louder and waving her hands more, which is not an intervention. Same thing over and over again. What's the definition of insanity? Do the same thing over and over again, expect a different result. That's actually Chris Argyris's double loop theory. If we went to the theoretical framework behind that, Dr. Argyris was a professor at Harvard. I got to study with him for a little while. He was he lived to be 100. He was already old when I knew him, but you're doing the same thing over and over again. Either you're not doing the lesson at all, or you're teaching it the way you taught it the first time, which they didn't get. Either way, in research, we would say they had no treatment. I said, I knew that before I even went, that they didn't have a treatment. You can't have the same scores 3 years in a row if you actually had a treatment. If you actually had a treatment, your scores would either go up or they would go down, but they would not be the same. Them being the same means nothing has changed. You've had no treatment. Even if you had given them a treatment, sometimes treatments don't work and they actually make your scores go down because they aren't as good as what you were doing before. So if you have a treatment, your scores will either go up or go down, but they won't stay the same. Even if you taught the lesson, if it didn't work, it was no treatment. I said, you had no treatment. I just had to figure out what form of no treatment you had. So my guess is they're not teaching the lessons. Pretty simple. To Whitney's point, you've mandated a program, but it's an unfunded mandate. You didn't give us any people. You did stupid things like ran your curriculum people off, which was, we don't work in prison camps, folks. You can't make people do this. If you set conditions that they're not interested in and they have other options, guess what? They'll leave. They will leave. Now, as a Hertzberg savant, I love Hertzberg dissertations. Theory of motivation, Friedrich Hertzberg. It's a two-factor theory, folks. Hertzberg's theory of motivation, which is job satisfaction, teacher retention, it's an HR theory. What people don't understand, satisfaction is not a continuum. It's two things. Either you're happy or you're sad. You're motivated or you're not. You're either satisfied or you're dissatisfied. It's not a continuum. What does that mean? I have to explain this to my doctoral students in chapter 5 all the time. When you're making recommendations, should see just as many of things that you ought to quit doing as things you ought to start doing. We have this notion. If we let teachers, and I've said this before, if we let teachers wear jeans on Friday, that'll make up for keeping them 2 hours of faculty meeting on Wednesday. No, it won't. So the recommendation shouldn't be more jeans Friday. It should be quit having 2-hour faculty meetings on every Wednesday. The whole notion here is in intervention, we need to understand there's certain things we need to quit doing that we're doing now. That would help us as much as things that we start doing. We got to quit doing dumb things that make everybody angry, like trying to reclassify people and pull people out and force them to go into jobs they don't want or places, or you got to quit doing the dumb things if you want to keep people. Because if you do bad things to them, no amount of good things will make up for the one bad thing you did. They will leave you. Yeah. But I don't know why we don't understand Hertzberg better as school administrators. Bringing donuts like I used to once a month. Olivia, I used to stop at the old Davis Donut House. I told that story, didn't it? The old Davis Donut House downtown in Forest City. It's out on West Main now, but it used to be downtown in Forest City. Davis's Donuts. I used to stop every once a month and get a big load of donuts and carry them to the faculty. No amount of donuts will make up for the bad things you do to teachers. You got to understand that. If you reclassify your curriculum people, they won't go to the building and be happy. They'll just leave. How did you not think? I mean, school administrators are supposed to be smarter than this. You're supposed to understand some of these theories. I love those orange twists too. I can tell you right now. I think I'm still carrying some of them like saddlebags after all these years. I hadn't eaten an orange twist in 30 years. I think I still got them on me. I love them things. That was my favorite, was orange twist. Man, so good. All right, back to the list of things. I like that Brenda pointed out that IEPs are supposed to be a collaborative atmosphere. That's, when I respond back to your post, I always tell you, these were the takeaway things that I hope you found when you did this. And that's one of them. It doesn't matter who does the paperwork. IEPs are collaborative. Macy pointed out that the teams are fluid and can change, and we're going to talk about IEPs in a minute. And our last star of the week was Bill, who's he called me a while ago. He couldn't be here tonight. He had a school event. Bill has already finished his OMA artifacts and his competency folio for the semester. That he's finished, OMA, so he's done his artifacts, so that's good. So let's talk about IEPs. We're supposed to talk about special ed tonight. We're still good on our time. One of the worst things that you can do is to violate FERPA. What is FERPA? So let me share my screen. Under our weekly, I've got some really good stuff for you tonight. And so I've got one of the links. I can close that. Don't do that. So let me close that. Okay. Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. And this is how you have to handle data and access and information about exceptional children. It's here among our module 3. If you don't know what IDA is, you better, here's your handy dandy website for that. If you don't know much about exceptional children, here's the website for that, the parent information resources. See, here's the thing you got to understand about IEP meeting. Parents know more than you do. They have infinite resources, and they've got all these things right here. And so just cheat, go in and find out what they know. Right here is a handy dandy place that has everything that you need to know. If you don't need to know, it's even got a link about IDEA in here. And right here it is, in FERPA. But one of the biggest mistakes that I see emerging administrators make is, as I told you, you'll probably be the LEA rep. and you're the traffic cop for that IEP meeting about who gets in, who gets out, whether we have the meeting or not. Dr. Stain, if he were here with us tonight, I've got his PowerPoint. It's wonderful. We'll go over it last. He's being sued right now. I don't know if the case has been adjudicated or not. From 5 years ago when he was principal in Lincoln County. 2 of his teachers were standing in the hallway discussing a child in exceptional children's program. A third teacher overheard them and told the parent, they're going to lose. I mean, they're doing everything they can, but they're going to lose. But privacy around kids and their information, I'm telling you, I've been in court 1,000 times when I was in charge of that. And boy, they talk ugly to you too when you go to court. The only good thing about going to court in Charlotte was from the Ed Center, you can walk through the back of Marshall Park across to 4th Street and not have to move your vehicle. I wore a path in the dirt going back and forth so much. We stayed in court all the time. Parents sue you all the time. They bring advocates. They know the law better than you do. So here's the question. Me and my neighbor, Lakeitha, from down in Huntersville, she is the LEA rep at Grand Oaks Elementary. We're getting ready to have an IEP meeting. The EC teacher is there. All the people who are on the team are there, except the regular ed teacher, David, is not there. Sean's there. He's a regular ed teacher, 6th grade regular ed teacher. Can we substitute Sean?
I will tell you at EHS we have. I think it is a bad idea because you can get called by the parent going, you did not have a knowledgeable individual of my child on the team. You've met the requirement, but you haven't met the requirement.
Exactly. That's why I did. Now, if he's not a 6th grade teacher, that's a simple one. No. But my point is, David's 6th grade, Sean's 6th grade, but Sean just hit the nail on the head. While technically you met the letter of the law, the parent would argue that you didn't meet. He might be a 6th grade teacher, but he doesn't know my child. He has no standing. Therefore, you have divulged private information to an individual with no standing in my case. And I can tell you, when you go to court, you will get your tail wore out over doing something that dumb. While technically it looks like it's legal. Now, we would know if he was an 8th grade teacher that we couldn't pass him off. But we got to also know, don't try to split hairs here. If David is not available, don't go get Sean. You can't just, I guess.
I hadn't considered the FERPA implication here because my line was going down IDEA, where the parent would claim you violated the child's due process rights because you didn't have the right member on the team to help reach a decision.
And then the extension of that, where they do monetary on you, is when you violate FERPA. FERPA is money. Let me make that clear. When you go to court, they can say you didn't do the right thing and you got to amend it. But if you violate FERPA, they fine you. $6,000 a pop, by the way. That little mistake cost you $6,000.
Can I ask a question?
Yes.
Okay. So me and my teammate often like switch kids or team teach. So would that same thing apply if I stepped in for one of hers because I had taught the child?
I think you could get by with that because you do have standing. If you teach the child, I think you have standing. But even then, I would clear it with the parent before we started. Remember, these things are collaborative. They are collaborative. I would clear it with the parent. Parents shouldn't give you any problem, but if they say no, we want her regular teacher, then I would say, okay, we'll postpone. We'll move it to another. So that's the first, the big, the big things that get you on EC. That's the first one is you didn't run your meeting correctly. in terms of who you let in the door to start with. No matter what happens at the meeting, you didn't have the right people there. If you're the LEA rep, you need to make sure you know you have the right people there. The second thing is allowing accommodations that your district doesn't do. You need a cheat sheet on what your district does and the accommodations that they do and don't allow, or that they have. Don't promise something you didn't have. Remember, when you're new, as I've told you before, you need to be scripting as LEA rep. You need to be scripting these meetings so that you can follow up with EC people and others to find out what did I do here, what could I have done differently here, here's what happened, what should I have done here or there, whatever, until you can get your feet on the ground. Caution, err on the side of caution. Don't let people in that you're not sure about. Make sure that you don't promise any accommodations. Pause the meeting. Let me go find out if we can do that or not. And don't promise things that you can't promise. Don't give access to people who don't have standing. Don't violate FERPA. Don't give accommodations that you don't have. Those kinds of things. Now, those are some of the more common problems that you have. Another one that I want to talk specifically about is when to do manifestation determination. What is a manifestation determination? When a kid has created a behavior problem and you've offered to suspend them out of school for up to 10 days with a hearing for their behavior, or they have achieved 10 days of change in placement, you have to move to a manifestation determination. Now, biggest mistake people make is not understanding placement. Placement is butt in seat. I'm just going to be graphic. Placement is butt in seat. And you say, well, he was just in the room next to. Placement is butt in seat. If his butt is not in his seat, in his room, it's a change in placement. Well, he was next door. I don't care that he was next door. We didn't suspend him out of school. He was in school and in seat. If his butt wasn't in his regular seat, that's a change in placement. You were supposed to have an IEP meeting to do that. If at 10 days his butt's not been in his seat, you have to do a manifestation determination. The DEC 5 functional behavior assessment updated psychological, updated functional behavior intervention plan. All those things have to be done. It's a good bit of paperwork. Now, here's where the chronically stupid lose their house. They think that 10 days is an absolute, that it's a Faustian bargain. But there's something in the law that talks about repeated behaviors. The third time that a kid repeats the same behavior, he doesn't, he passes go and gets the $200. He goes directly to the front of the line for a manifestation determination. What you're doing in a manifestation determination is determining, is this kid's behavior a function of his disability? If so, we may have some relief in a change of placement. It may go to a different school, different program, may have more restrictive behavior intervention plan. That's not a bad thing. But I've had principals say, well, we've only suspended him 3 times. We still got 7 more days. No, you don't. He's fought 3 times in a row. We're going to get sued the next time he fights and hurts a teacher or another kid. 3 times shows a pattern of repeated behavior. The 10 days for change of placement goes out the window. It is superseded by the pattern in federal law. Don't be a nitwit. Button seat, first thing you got to understand, in school, out of school, doesn't matter. His butt's not in his seat. Oh, we're doing that bouncing or rolling in PBIS. He was in the room next door. Then that's a change of placement. That's one of your 10 days. This is the 3rd time he's fought this year. We just give him 1 day every time he fights. He can fight 7 more times before we have to do that paperwork. How dumb are you? He's showing a pattern of repeated behavior. He's got an IEP. You've got to move him to a manifestation by law. 3 times is the charm. These are the things that people get that you're like, how could you be this dumb? How could you be this dumb? This stuff is it's easy. It's easy to track this stuff. Parents are paying attention. They know the law. So those are the things those are the ones that get you. You don't follow FERPA. You let people in. You promise accommodations you can't follow through on. You think because the EC people did the paperwork that they get to be in charge. No, it's collaborative. And this notion of when we have to move to manifestation determination and convening the IEP meeting to see if this kid needs a change in place, when to have the meeting. If you don't have the right people, cancel it. Pause if you don't know the answer to questions. Make sure that you do that. Yeah, a meeting after 3 times would have saved you a lot. Yes, exactly right. Would have saved you a lot of bruises and headaches, and keeps your staff from getting beat up.
I'm the only first grade teacher CPI trained.
Yeah,
Oh,
that's restraint training for those of you who don't know.
I have.
And we have about 6 first graders who
Have to be restrained.
Oh my.
And if you'd have went ahead and done their manifestation after the 3rd time, probably 90% of that could have been eliminated or avoided. Look at that bruise on her arm. Oh my God. Yeah. Yep. Yep. I mean, I'll be the first to tell you, I just used to choke them out. I'd be
What?
abusing them now. I used to choke them out in high school. I'm not going to tell you, not going to hit me. I just choke them out. I'm big. I just choke them out. Tall, get leverage on them, just choke them out. Put their lights out. They frown on that now. I'm telling you, doing CPI, it protects the child, but boy, you take a beating doing it now. I'm not doing that. I'm just choking them out. I do not envy you that task, doing CPI, even on little kids. I've still got a scar on my hand when I was in elementary. One of the worst things I ever got was I got bit by a kid. Getting bit by a kid is worse than getting bit by a dog. It gets infected. You got to get them shots. Good Lord, my hand swelled up like a volleyball.
I was bit 3 times this year.
That's what I'm talking about. 3rd time's the charm. We're going to manifestation. We're going for change in place. We got to get some help here. How stupid is it to continue to just take that whipping all year long because you don't want to do a little paperwork? I'm just like, oh my Lord, what's wrong with you people?
I like what you said about the manifestation, from viewing it from a standpoint of, we're not trying to kick the kid out. We're trying to get the kid in the appropriate place where they can receive the best education possible.
Exactly. We're trying to help them. Why are we letting a little paperwork stand in the way of trying to help children? We're trying to help our faculty not get beat up and bruised up. Other kids getting hurt. That's what we're talking about here. We're talking about trying to have a safe place for everybody to come every day.
Do you know what the IQ range is for self-contained in South Carolina?
Gosh, it's so low now as to be almost non-existent, isn't it?
I know it is. I mean, I'm in North Carolina, and I know that one of these children came out of a self-contained classroom out of the very beginning of the year because he tested out because of his adaptive skills.
Hey, Whitney, reach out to Jessica. She could probably answer that question for you. Unfortunately, her internet connection it broke, so
Yeah.
she dropped offline. But she should be able to answer that one for you.
Yeah,
She's easy down here.
They've lowered it so low that's why they're exiting so many kids out. They've lowered it so low. I mean, they would be what we would used to call trainable now, rather than educable. They're down in that range.
Yeah, I think I was told it's like 57 or something.
I was going to say it's less than 60. I know. I was going to say 50. I think it's like 50 now. I mean, that's down in the trainable range, folks. So, I mean, we're letting kids out that we need to keep. And
they weren't transitioned in either. They were just like
just let out. So just let them out.
Self-contained, you can kind of just do whatever. And now we're in the regular classroom with rules and expectations, and it's chaos.
Yeah. Just down the road from Olivia there. Olivia, I was AP one time at New Hope before they tore it down. and we had trainable and educable class there. We self-contained them. And let me tell you, although the language sounds similar, there's a huge difference. I learned that early in my career. Jessica says it's 70. Whew, I'm telling you, I think they're letting kids out lower than that. But there's a lot of difference between a 50 and a 70, folks, or a 55 and a 70. Oh, big difference, big difference. Those kids are, they are dynamite out in the open. I can tell you, they are dynamite. I had a couple of those. I had a Willie M at anybody know what a Willie M is? They don't call them Willie M's anymore. The kids that are that turn out to be serial killers. Seriously, that's what they do. They become serial killers. They kill animals when they're young, and then they kill other children and become serial killers. I had a Willie M at New Hope, and the lady from mental health came and got him. And the first time she came and got him, I never will forget, her name was Fran Marofka. First time, she wasn't from around here. And the first time she came and got him, on the way back to school, he didn't want to come back. He reached over and grabbed the wheel of her car and turned them into oncoming traffic, and nearly killed them both. So I had to keep him in my office the rest of the year. The next year we sent him to high school, to the old Central, and he knocked Miss, who was it? Oh gosh, she was the institution at Central. I taught there. He knocked her down the hill right in front of the cafeteria and broke her hip, nearly killed her. Those kids, they're dangerous. They don't need to be out in that. They hurt themselves. They hurt others. You can't let those kids out, but we are. That's what I'm talking about. We're manipulating, we're massaging the rules now, and turning those loose out in society. And I'm telling you, it's dangerous. But yeah, we had a true Willie M, a true Willie M.
This is out the. I'm sorry about my camera being off, but
Okay.
what you're explaining for EC, I teach kindergarten. This is every day in my classroom, and they're not EC.
See, but they need they need behavior intervention.
But the parents, I guess, because we have a team, and we take all the data on them, and then we turn it over. But if the parents are not willing to go any further, it doesn't go anywhere.
Well, but see, the beauty of kids who aren't identified, don't have an IEP, they don't get a say-so in that. You know, if they're not identified, they don't have an IEP. If you say, you put them out of school. I mean, that's the thing about it, is there is no limit on they don't have a change. You don't have to worry about change of placement with them. They can't, you put them out for 1, 2, 3, whatever, until they get their behavior under control.
They don't put them out. I've been threatened, punched in my face.
No, we can't
kicked in the face, but he has not been suspended yet.
See that's just poor administration.
And then he threatened a little girl with a piece of glass, threatened to cut her. I mean, all this stuff, and this little boy has not been suspended yet. That's what I'm saying. I'm in a regular classroom, and what you're explaining in EC, this is my life every day.
Yeah. Well, that's what I'm talking about is you can't let schools become slaughterhouses. These people have protections, and we have to learn how to work within those. But regular ed kids, I've had parents, be angry and say, it's not good to suspend my child, to which I would respond, I never told you it was. It's good for the rest of us to suspend your child. We need a break from your child. I've said that multiple times. That does not endear me to parents, but now my job is to be a champion for kids. Your kid is keeping other kids from learning. You're also hurting our faculty here. I can't allow that. I need these people in order to teach these children. They won't come here every day if they're in fear for their life and their safety. They won't show up. These are some things. This is a group endeavor. The rights of the group have to supersede the rights of the individual. Otherwise, our organization doesn't work. Will that make parents happy with you? No, it won't. But your job's not to make them happy either. You got to have school. You got to have order. You got to have discipline. We need to get kids the services that they deserve, that they need. But if people aren't going to play along, then we have to do what we have to do. Yeah, I never claimed I was everybody's favorite principal, but we had school. We had school. If you don't know about intervention, I mean, if you don't know about inclusion versus mainstreaming, I've got a really good, it's long, long. Oh, it's long. This one is a good one. Inclusion is when you push the teachers in rather than pull the kids out. We're doing a lot of that nowadays. Now, let's be clear. Nobody ever said inclusion worked better than mainstreaming. It's just 30% cheaper. And that's why we're doing it. Let me say that again. It's 30% cheaper. That's why we went to an inclusion model rather than the old mainstreaming model where we had classes of kids, because it's just a lot cheaper. Your last case study will be based off an inclusion versus mainstreaming model. You can go ahead and look at it, but it encompasses everything that we've talked about in the SKIP and OMA this semester. But it's based off of that. So you need to make sure that you understand the difference in inclusion and mainstreaming. It has a lot of good EC stuff in here. And then the last thing I have for you in that vein, and we're going to talk about our case study for next week, is this. Now, Dr. Sane put this together. I always like to credit people for their work. Now, I'll show you the level that I am here. So this is his slideshow. It's wonderful. It's got free and public education. It's got child finds. You know that you have to find all the children in your district, even if they're not at your school, if they're at privates or charters or homeschool. You have to find them and evaluate them for services. It's called child find. That's part of that hunting down at 20 days. You got to do that. Least restricted environment, continuum of alternative placement decisions. IEP team in yellow, he's got the best practice. Don't hold IEP meetings if stakeholders cannot be present. LEA reps should always be present and involved in team decision. That means they need to be taking script and knowing what to do. Children in private schools, parental consent, referrals, initial evaluations, evaluation procedures, screenings, reevals, MTS and RTI, how that dovetails in. Development of the IEP, procedural safeguards, manifestation termination. Now, you've seen all this nice graphic work. This is my slide that I put in. I don't care about stuff like that. Button seat. That's what I can't, I had to discipline administrators, had to let some go over they didn't understand button seat. They were saying, well, we're using ISS rather than OSS, and so we can do as much of that as no. That PBIS bouncing and rolling and moving from one room to the next, all that rather than no. Out of school, in school, bus suspensions, changing schedule or classroom and pattern. All those things you got to understand. And then the manifestation determination, what it is, functional behavior assessment, implement behavior intervention plan, and the DEC 5, all the paperwork. You have to update the psychological, update the IEP, and then here it is. Make parents involved. That's what we were talking about earlier. We're going to substitute Sean for David. Can't do that because we know he doesn't come in contact with him. And but in Whitney's example, since she does teach that kid part-time, if the parent, we would do that, and the parent should be okay with that unless they objected. But again, it's a collaborative thing. EC is hard, folks. I've kind of run through the highlights. Dr. Sane's PowerPoint's really good. It's a better primer. Parents know more than you do because they live with it every day. They have that child. One of our students last night has a child on an IEP. She talked about having to get an advocate to force the school to do the right thing. Parents have a lot of resources now. They have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of resources. They can bring advocates. The Children's Law Center in Charlotte will really wear you out. They'll keep you in court all the time. Yeah, Sean said he's lived this. And so This is not one of those things where we'll just depend on everybody else being ignorant. They aren't. So if they aren't, you can't be, is my point. That's pretty much it. So EC's hard. We'll talk more about it when we talk about discipline and due process, because there's some separate things that we have to do for them. But again, we can't get into that notion of we got 10 days, we'll just give them 1 day every time. Third time they do the same thing, we're on the hook. We do the manifestation. We try to get the kid the help that they need. I know suspension's not good for kids, but if they're disrupting everybody else, then we got to take measures to do that. We can't run the school for one kid. We have to run it for all of them. Let's talk about our case study for next week. Again, our case study is the teacher who went off the rails and tried to fail Bobby for the whole year for turning in his brother's homework. We've talked about it at length already. Here's the specific directions. Be sure to have read chapter 6 in school discipline in your school law book. What should the principal's course of action be? Address due process, substantive and procedural, and standards of arbitrary and capricious. Obviously, he didn't get, we know what the substance of due process is. He didn't get to tell his side of the story. He didn't get to present witnesses, none of those things. The charges, he didn't get an office referral. The teacher just, judge, jury, and executioner them, did a zero tolerance on him. And the standards of arbitrary and capricious, obviously, it's very capricious to put a kid out for the whole year for turning in his brother's homework when the most you can give him is 1 day of ISS. Address the 4 ethical paradigms, and again, those on the role of the principal. That's under module 1. It's on the back side of the lesson plan. Let's see. I've already closed it. Dang it. Let me get it back up here. This is under module 1. Again, this case is based on this. The principal grades and classifies pupil. Now, the principal did what the law said. He made an accurate report to the superintendent. Law had been broken, but it was civil law, not criminal. So that means the superintendent. He told the superintendent what the teacher had done. Superintendent replied, be careful, because that's all he can do, because the principal grades and classifies. And this was not a criminal offense. And so he did exactly what he was supposed to do. The teacher did not follow due process. And what she did was arbitrary. So back to this. Create as a team a short PowerPoint presentation that addresses numbers 2 and 3 above. Make sure you do your ethical paradigms. Where are your ethical paradigms? They're at the end of school law here. Here are your 4 ethical paradigms. Justice, care, critique, and profession. Make sure that you adjudicate her actions and the principals against these standards. Not only hers, but the principals as well. Did they do their, what should the principal do under the ethics of the case? And what did the teacher do that would not follow along that ethical concern? And then after our Zoom session next week, you get to write up to a half a page and tell me anything you want to tell me. It only comes to me. You can say my teammate are turds. They didn't help me a bit. They were just argumentative. It's like pulling a boat anchor. Or you can say my team worked well. They were all scholars and professionals and love working with them. You can say I learned a lot from this case, or I didn't agree with. I think this should have been the principal's fault. Whatever you want to share with me about the case. That would be greatly appreciated. Understanding that next time the superintendent's going to be wrong, and then two wrong principals. But this one is kind of the most common one about grading and due process and how we treat kids, and that again, it goes back to our core belief that we got to be champions for kids. We can't be those people who say, well, I don't like tell a teacher, I don't like what you did. I'll support you in public, but you know, in private, I'll tell you, don't do that again. No, can't do that. She loses your house, you'll lose yours too. But you can't be that way. You got to be authentic. We don't treat kids this way. We don't care that Bobby is a turd or his family, and we just don't treat kids this way. And so that's really what this case study is about. But make sure you look at due process. What is due process? What are kids supposed to get? Remember, since '69, kids get due process. What is a zero tolerance expulsion? You know, if you do this and do that, you get no due process. What is the school to prison pipeline? What happens to kids that we put out of school for a year, that we fail for the year? What happens to their educational career? Where do they usually end up? In prison. Those are all things. That's the ethical piece of it. That's the ethic of the profession. That we shouldn't be doing things like that over something as silly as turning in your brother's homework. What does your code of conduct in your district say is the penalty for turning in somebody's homework? Understand, you can't punish them academically and behavior wise. It's always a bad idea to punish a kid academically for a behavior incident. It's hard enough to get kids to want to be in school and to achieve and learn as it is. Why would you be punishing them academically for a behavior issue? That makes no sense. And you can't do both, because that'd be double jeopardy, which is capricious. Too much punishment for one crime. So that's our case study for next week. All right, did I stop in time for questions? I did. Look at me. All right, questions from the evening. I was mentioning self-contained versus
I've missed it because that's when I was getting the IQ limit for
Okay.
coming
What we
out
were
of
talking about there was on the self-contained. We're trying to move away from that to the point where we're taking kids out of self-contained that need to be self-contained and moving them into the general population. And then we're taking, instead of doing our classes, our mainstream classes, we're pushing the teachers in. We're doing all that because of money. We're doing it because it's not because it's what's good thing for teachers, schools, and kids. It's because it's cheaper. And we're putting teachers at risk because we're letting these self-contained kids out to run in the general population. And that's not smart. It's not good. I learned that at New Hope. Those kids are dangerous. You need to keep them pinned up. The second worst whipping I ever had, I told you the worst whipping I ever had in my life was at Central High School on lunch duty. 2 ninth grade girls started fighting, and all the older guys that had been there a while just stood back and go let them tire themselves out. I jumped right in. You couldn't lay a nickel on me anywhere. I didn't have a bruise or a scratch or a cut when they got done with me. Them 2 ninth grade girls. Second worst whipping I ever had was I had 2 self-contained classes when I was junior high principal in Charlotte. I had 2 self-contained, and they were right outside the door. The hallway went into the cafeteria where all the commotion was, and they'd come running out. Smartest thing I ever did was move them to another building away from all that commotion so we could keep them kind of isolated away. And made our school a lot safer. Just overnight, our school became much safer overnight. But we're not doing these things because it's good for kids. We're not pushing teachers into the rooms. We're not letting these kids out of self-contained and mainstreaming them. We're not doing that because it's good for kids. We're doing it because it's cheaper, and it's making our schools less safe, and it's making the work conditions worse for teachers. That's the notion here. See, I get people every year who talk about, well, this isn't as good. Why are we doing it? Nobody said it was this good. It's cheaper. That's why. Well, that's not the right thing to do. I agree. It's not the right thing to do. But that's the financial climate that we're in. We're trying to divert as much money as we can to private school and charter schools. And I don't have a thing against either one of them. I'm a big supporter of some charter schools do a great job. I actually have one of my doctoral students who founded a charter school and built it from scratch, Emerald, down in Bladen County. She was married Kate. Kate Alice Dunaway was my doctoral student. I was her chair. She ran a big one in Charlotte. She's now doing some other things. But yeah, understanding that we're trying to move money, and it has implications on the safety of schools and how schools operate on a daily basis. And so principals, you're going to have to take some whippings with parents in order to protect your faculty and your kids. Otherwise, people won't work for you. I'll just tell you right now, people won't work for you if you let them get beat up and not be safe in their job. They won't work for you. Now, oh well, parents won't like me. That's not your job to make parents like you. It would be nice if they did, but I didn't see anywhere on that list of laws where it said parents must like you. If it comes down, again, you got to be a champion for kids and doing the right thing for them, not their parents. Parents don't, it's harder to get a fishing license than you have to have a license to have kids. Just because they're a parent doesn't mean they have any knowledge or that what they want is right or just or whatever. You have to run the organization for everybody. It's hard. People, and when you don't give people what they want, they tend to not like you. They don't see the greater good ever. They never see the greater good. In my 738 policy class for my doctoral students in LS, I'll be with them out in Goldsboro this weekend. That's their first scenario. A parent wants to give a bunch of money to school, but they want you to switch teachers, and there's policy in your district that you won't do that. What are you going to do?
Thank you for the offer, but no thanks.
No thanks. That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
If you truly meant to help the schools, you'd give the money.
Anyway, it would not. And those kind of people, it never works out like that anyway. It's more trouble than it's worth. You just need to move on from that. That dark money never works out anyway. There's some colleges that got on that dark money train as well. That never works out. Schools that get on that dark money train, that money under the table for favor deal, what we call dark money in the business, it never ends well, and it always ends badly. That dark money trail, and so it's what we're talking about. You need to run things on the up and up. You need to follow law and policy and run things on the up and up. You need to, you can put a kid out of school. It's not against the rules to do that. Regular ed kid. Oh, he's just a kindergarten. Doesn't matter. Again, again, you get bit by a 5-year-old. See how that goes for you. They got every German known to man. They're dirty. Mouse dirtier than a dog.
Well, if you let him get by with it in kindergarten, he's going to think he can get by with
Well, it's antecedent behaviors. If you don't stop the little things, they become the big things. It only gets worse and worse and worse. It only gets worse. Doesn't get better. It's not like a bad haircut you'll grow out of in 6 weeks. That's not going to happen. You're exactly right, Whitney. It only gets worse. It gets worse in every grade and it just snowballs. And then those little things like biting becomes bringing a gun and shooting. You got to understand that these people they're grown. I mean, they didn't just show up one day. We grew these kids who are school shooters, and we grew them. We groomed them. We started and we let them become that, or we facilitated them to become that. We can't save them all, but we've got to save as many. The organization, we have to look out for everybody. That's what we have to do. All right, good conversation tonight. Your work, I'm proud of your work. Your work is good. I read every word of it. Everybody seems to be caught up. Everybody seems to be doing well. Quality of your work is great. I enjoy the conversations. I'm really looking forward to the case study next week. again, that's as much fun as these classes are for me. The case study weeks are really a highlight as well, because sometimes we get in. I had a couple semesters ago, I had Kathleen. She's in the doctoral program with me now. You'd thought she wanted to kill me, but she's a school psychologist. I loved her take. It's a little bit different. Psychologists are a little bit offbeat, and we had a really good time on those nights. But voice your opinion. Let's make this a conversation. We're having a good time, or I am anyway. That's what we're supposed to do is be authentic and learn how school really works. That's the whole point of an operations course like this, is how school really work. Not what's this theoretical. What's the practical? What's it really like? Where are the pitfalls? That's what we're trying to figure out and find out, so that we can know enough to protect ourselves until we can learn enough to be effective in our jobs. That's the whole notion here. I'll see you next week. Our time is up. I've had a great time tonight. Thank you. I appreciate you being with me. Give yourself a hand.